Go ahead, Regent Pal.
All right, thank you. I'm going to gavel to order this special meeting of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. I wish a very good morning to everybody, and especially want to thank those who are joining us via the live stream video this morning. So before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're meeting under unusual circumstances, to say the least. Minnesota's open meeting law allows for us to conduct meetings by electronic means in situations like this. And I'll go through the specific protocol for today's meeting. But first, I want to provide some opening remarks. It was just 4 weeks ago that we were meeting in Duluth and hearing about the university's initial response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Much has happened in the short time since that meeting. At the university and state and national levels, extraordinary actions have been taken. The university swiftly converted all spring semester courses to online instruction. University operations have been altered dramatically, and Governor Walz issued a stay-at-home order for all Minnesotans. These decisions have impacted the way we all go about our daily lives. How we learn, how we work, and how we interact with one another has changed seemingly overnight. Throughout the last 4 weeks, President Gabel has been a decisive leader, and I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank her for the leadership she's provided for the university at this time of emergency. As you all know, things have been moving very fast, and she's been steering a steady ship. The purpose of our meeting today is to discuss a topic that is of utmost importance to students across our 5 campuses, as well as their families. Early last week, President Gabel announced that the university would issue a credit to students who vacated their university housing before the end of the semester. In her judgment, it was important to act quickly in order to reassure students that the university would act to limit the impact of this pandemic on their lives. After President Gabel's announcement, Governor Walz issued a stay-at-home order, and we learned more about how our peers were handling similar situations in other states. To Vice Chair Swigum and me, these were compelling reasons to reconsider that initial decision. Today, President Gabel will walk through several options and make a recommendation for a new plan for housing and student fee credits. I welcome the administration's recommendation, and I look forward to the conversation. Before I turn it over to President Gabel, I want to talk through the protocol for today's meeting. As mentioned earlier, the open meeting law allows us to conduct meetings by electronic means, but it requires that we take the additional step to record our votes by roll call. For any action before us today, Mr. Steeves will take a roll call vote. Additionally, the board's bylaws instruct us to operate under the guidance of Robert's Rules of Order. Robert's Rules suggests that speeches on a topic should be limited to 10 minutes or less. This rule's worked well for us in recent meetings, and I'd like to put it in place for our business today. So, colleagues, I ask that you keep your comments as concise as possible. Finally, since it will be difficult for regents to signal to me that they would like to speak, I'll call on regents for their questions and comments in alphabetical order. If you don't wish to speak, you're welcome to pass. Robert's Rules advises us that members may speak up to 2 times on any given topic, so I'm going to go through the roster twice. In order to have the best sound quality for our meeting and the live stream and video recording, participants will be muted until I call on them to speak. So as you've already heard from Mr. Steeves, you don't need to mute and unmute your line. We'll handle that at the back end. But please allow for a brief pause after you're called on and before you start speaking. The only time when all microphones will be turned on is when I'm asking for a motion or a second. If you need to signal that you'd like to speak out of turn, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom. And Mr. Steeves will monitor those and alert me should I need to call on a regent. So finally, I'll remind everyone that although we can't see our audience, today's meeting is live and open to the public via live stream, and it will be archived. So with that, I will turn it over to President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Vice Chair Sviggum, members of the board. It's nice to see you all, even in this way, and I hope that you and yours are healthy, safe, and well. I want to begin by acknowledging each and every member of our university community for how they've responded in this very short but incredibly urgent period of time. As the chair noted just a few weeks ago, we were preparing for spring break. It seems like so much longer than it actually was. In less than a month, we've transitioned from preparation into action, and we've moved fast and we've made a lot of changes. I'll give a full report on these changes when we meet next week, but the expression building the plane as you fly captures a lot of what the last month has felt like for all of us, including a lot of uncertainty as we work through a challenge like the one that we're experiencing. In dealing in a time like this of crisis with incomplete facts, what we do is revert to our commitments and our values, which we've been discussing all year, more in the context of strategic planning, but they have been incredibly useful to us in this time. So what hasn't changed is our commitment to our students, our commitment to discovery, and to our mission and to the state of Minnesota. We're committed to serve, and we're committed also to be willing to adjust as new information and new circumstances dictate and emerge. Just as some examples, our faculty transitioned in a matter of days to alternative instructional formats so that we could fulfill the academic commitment to our students. And even after doing that, transitioned more to extend the pass-fail option to reflect the unique circumstances in which our students are learning. Researchers and experts across the system have dived into COVID-19 with groundbreaking research, new clinical trials, and even homemade ventilators, as you read about, to serve critically ill patients. And many of our other faculty outside of traditional health sciences areas of study have transitioned and added an initiative so that they can be of assistance as well. Staff have stepped up, from law enforcement and emergency responders who protect our campuses to our behind the scenes workers who we could not function without, and especially those in information technology who have supported our massive move to remote learning and working. And to our students, talk about a transition and talk about adjustment. We are, I know I speak for all of us, so proud of them for how they've demonstrated ultimate flexibility and understanding, and yet also remain committed to their own task, their own responsibilities, and their own contributions, from continued advocacy and engagement of our student government leadership to how they've participated in online courses, travel restrictions. Our students who were abroad had to come home midstream, and I know all of them have been very focused on practicing preventative hygiene and contributing to the social distancing that will help our entire community stay well. Every decision that we as a university are making is about them and about our mission and our grounding in recognizing the importance of every student, every faculty member, every staff member, and ultimately the legacy of this incredible institution in the state of Minnesota and in the way that it serves. We respect that every one of the decisions that we make affects many lives and comes with the responsibility to listen and sometimes to shift as situations evolve and to respond to new information, context, and conditions as things change so very rapidly during this very unusual time. One of the decisions of many that we made over the course of this 1 month, all of this in 1 month, was to calculate a financial credit for students in housing and dining. That initial announcement, as the chair referred to, was based on an assessment of factors that we shared in previous communication. At that time, dorms were open, many students were still in there, lots of students' belongings were in there, many of our services were still available, modified or sometimes running in full freight. All of our employees, including our students, were still working. By the way, all of our employees, including our students, are still working. And if the work they were doing is no longer available under our current circumstance, they are still being paid. Today, we feel a distinct physical separation amongst all of our students from campus. But even just a few days ago, when we made our original calculation, campus felt quite differently than it does now. So using our understanding of campus life at that time, plus benchmarking against our peers, consulting with some of our experts, we made the plan that we made and announced that. But a lot has changed in the last few days. And so we come to you with a different proposal and more information that we would like to present for your review. We had a very distinct pivot point as an entire state and as a community on March 27th when Governor Walz's stay-at-home order went into effect. And that prohibited anyone from returning to campus who was not already living there or staying there, or who was designated as an essential employee who must perform their work on site. So that was a real moment. Things feel quite different since then. And we are working in a very different way since then. No better example than the way in which we're doing this board meeting today. Because of that change and the way that change has affected student life, campus life, and a variety of the services and activities that we've been able to undertake, my team has been working on a comprehensive student fee refund proposal that encompasses all students at all levels on all 5 of our campuses, and which has the benefit of and requires thousands of calculations because of the different arrangements, federal support, loans, and other custom options each student engages in. This system-wide approach considers the expenses and fees in light of the stay-at-home mandate and how that has changed our circumstances, including now that there are a small number of students in the dorms and the way in which honoring the stay-at-home order has changed campus life broadly. So to this end, the following represents the proposed campus-wide system-wide student fee refund plan. So first, starting with housing and residential life, you'll see on this slide in Tier 1 what we originally proposed, how that affected or was an expense on each campus and the total cost that would have created for the system as a whole. But now on Tier 2, what you see is students who have a spring semester contract for any housing and residential life service. So this would be housing, dining, flex dining dollars, different vocabulary on each campus, but for all campuses would receive a 100% credit from March 28th, the date of the stay-at-home order, through the end of their housing and dining contract. This credit doesn't apply to students who have remained on campus or are a resident of a university-managed residence hall or apartment. So in similar ways to how we analyze tuition, we're going through different levels, and then we'll present to the board how those levels stack up and accumulate to reflect the total amount of our proposal. So moving up from housing and residential life to voluntary meal plans, students on the Twin Cities campus with block, standard 11 meal, 14 meal, or anytime voluntary meal plans would receive a 100% credit of prorated expenses from March 28th through the end of the spring semester. Then into Tier 3, students who have paid for parking on the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, or Twin Cities campuses will receive a 100% refund of their parking fee from March 28th to the end of the semester. I note for your consideration that Rochester does not have university-owned parking. For recreation and wellness fees, Tier 4, students on the Crookston, Duluth, Morris, and Twin Cities campuses will receive a prorated credit equivalent to refunding fees from March 28th, 2020 through May 15th, 2020. Students on the Rochester campus will not be charged for April and May fees from the Y, since the Y will in turn not be billing for this same time period. On student services fees, in recognition that student groups are no longer able to meet in person, although many continue to meet virtually and other student services activities are still running in modified forms, the university will refund 50% of the student services fee, rec center refund plus an additional amount equal to 50% of the total student services fee on each campus. This would also apply from March 28th through May 15th, 2020. And then on transportation and safety, students on the Duluth and Twin Cities campus would receive a prorated credit equivalent to refunding fees from March 28th through May 15th. Crookston, Morris, and Rochester, as a point of note, do not charge this fee. If we stack all of this and refund all of these amounts, we are at Tier 6, which accumulates all of these fees, representing how campus life has changed in large part across the board since the governor's stay-at-home order. And if we use that as our date, the total estimated refund across the system is $27,824,000, as noted on the slide that you can see on your screen. I'll note that this is the amount of the refund. There are a few things that should be contextualized as you consider this refund. Student workers are still being paid if they work for the university. We have established an expanded emergency fund for students who find themselves in crisis for other reasons, whether they live on university housing or not, and have given instructions to students to how to obtain these resources. Students are still accessing mental health resources through telehealth and other services that remain intact. This is a refund to reflect how campus life has changed. Our support for our students in the classroom and beyond the classroom goes beyond this and remains a full commitment and intact, ongoing, and always will be. So members of the board, the situation we find ourselves in because of this pandemic is challenging. I wish there were a better or stronger word. It's also constantly evolving. We have made and will make many difficult decisions, like the important decision you have before you today. It will affect many lives. It will have a long-term impact, but our administration is committed to carefully considering every decision we make. And if we need to improve it or need to evolve so that we can be better or stronger for our students, we will do so, and we will come forward to you in the same vein that we are today. We very much appreciate the feedback that we have received on a variety of issues and on this approach, and we hope that we've addressed many of the questions that our university family has raised. As many of you know, I am myself a tuition-paying parent of a college student, and I greatly respect personally, and I know the entire leadership team greatly respects the commitment that every dollar is for every family that pays. It's a sacrifice and an investment, and I want to assure them that we know that and are taking that into very serious consideration as well. So at our meeting on April 7th, we'll discuss in more detail the university's broader response to the challenges posed, including the unique contributions we've been able to make and the ways in which many members of the campus community are stepping up, both in their work and in their personal commitments. The commitment of our campus community has been humbling. I'm incredibly honored to be a part of it. I'm looking forward to highlighting that for you. And I want to call to your attention that immediately after, well, not immediate, later that day after our meeting on April 7th, we'll be having a digital virtual town hall, and I'll provide more details on that as well. But in the meantime, I thank you for your support and feedback and guidance and governance during this difficult time, and for all that you do for the University of Minnesota. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I offer this proposed plan for your consideration.
All right. Thank you, President Gable, for your remarks and for the proposal. Thank you very much. Before we move to a discussion, is there a motion to approve the President's recommended student refund plan as outlined in the docket? Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved.
Okay,
Seconded.
It's been moved, it's been seconded. Thank you. All right, it's been moved and seconded. That motion has been approved and seconded. So we'll turn now to a discussion. And as I said, we're going to just do this in a straight alphabetical order. And therefore, I'll turn to Regent Anderson for his comments or questions.
Thank you, Chair Powell. When you said we're going to do that in alphabetical order, I was reminded of my elementary school physical education days, and I always had to go first, and I wasn't very good in the rope climb and pull-ups, so hopefully we'll be better here. I have some other questions, but I thought just to get, since I was going to go first, I reformulated my thought process, and I guess I had a memo, and I just want to know this is correct, and I think I heard President Gable say this. The memo says, I just want to be correct because I'm big on a prorated commitment to our students. For us receiving money for services they've received and for them receiving rebates, if you will, or refunds for services they haven't. But I go down and read my key point on this. Housing and residential life receive 100% credit from March 28th. Voluntary meal plans receive 100% credit from March 28th. Parking fees receive 100% refund from March 28th. And student services fee, a little bit different, receives a 50% of the total services fees. So I guess we're giving them from March 28th in those first three, housing and residential life, voluntary meal plans, and parking fees, they're receiving 100% back from getting those services. And my only question would be, what discussion came in, I believe, especially for the Twin Cities campus. I know it's about a week later for Crookston and Morris. This might be also true of Duluth. They were to come back on March 18th from spring break. I heard President Gable talk about the stay-at-home order, but most of our students were not there from the 18th to the 27th. So I'd just like to know what context we came in and not offering rebates for that 10 days.
Thank you, Regent Anderson, for your question. President Gable, would you like to respond or address members of your team to respond?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Anderson, the original communication asked students to explore whether they would be safer elsewhere, and that started actually in the middle of spring break. And we sent our first communication in that regard while we were on our retreat in Duluth, to reflect that if we were going to stand up online classes, which became clear that we would need to do for the rest of the semester, that students would have time to change their travel plans either as they returned from spring break or for 2 of our campuses as they departed for spring break, and also give our faculty some time to stand up in the middle of the semester a very different delivery model using technology that for some of them they had never used before. And so what we told our students at that time was, your classes will be online from March 18th forward for those students who are on spring break, and for those students who were heading into spring break, your classes will go online after. We didn't say you couldn't come back. Many of our students did, some didn't, because if they knew their classes were online, they changed their travel plans. We encouraged them not to. Some did and some didn't at that time. We didn't have a census to show exactly how many were back. Many of our students still had their belongings in the dorms at that time. And so there was a lot of variation between the March 18th commencement of online classes and the stay-at-home order on how many things were open, how many things were closed, how many students were there, and how many weren't, how many had their possessions there, which we, of course, we take responsibility for keeping safe, and how many didn't. So for many of our students, they have not been back to campus since spring break and would consider that the start of all of this. Some of our students had different days in between when they returned and got their things or came back and then decided, no, I'd actually rather be elsewhere. Some of our students are still there. For many of our students, being on campus is the best place for them for a variety of reasons that we have let them decide. Although that number is much smaller today than it was originally. For the management of the campus, broadly speaking, the maintenance of the buildings, including the dorms, how work was being done, how services were being provided, several things were modified or closed, but everything changed to a plateau level effective with the governor's stay-at-home order. So that feels both in terms of how we know the operations have changed, and also at the risk of having a looser word than we would like to have, the vibe of campus changed very distinctly with the passing of the date for the governor's stay-at-home order. So that's why we've used that as the starting point for the calculation. But I'll note for the board's consideration that calculation is based on that order. It doesn't, that we can discuss what the financial implications would be for different dates if that's what the board would like to do.
Thank you, President Gable. Let's move now to Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, colleagues and university community. I do support the recommendation of the president. An issue like this actually serves another purpose. It jolts us into a very different mindset, because we're going to have a series of decision points going forward that don't show up in our work plan, and that may require a reversal in decision based on changing circumstances. But it's a different way of operating, but I think it's a wake-up call for those of us that are used to governing this institution a little differently. The president talked about how it's changed her daily work. She's making dozens of these sort of decisions on the fly, and I think it's fine to adjust and adapt and reverse when we need to. The other thing I would assure the community is that the university is really on strong ground. And this is why we have reserves. This is why we have margins. This is why we have a strong credit rating. This is why we have a good balance sheet. We're prepared to work through these issues, and that will allow us to have choices going forward, both choices in the short term and choices strategically. So I think despite the challenges, and there's going to be a lot of them, and there's going to be pressure on money, we're in a strong position to get through this. And I want to thank again the staff for making the necessary change here and getting the students back some additional credit going forward. Thank you.
All right, Regent Beeson, thank you. Let's move to Regent Her.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is, what is the average because I keeping in mind a variety of things that people pay for, not pay for. So what would an average student get back in terms of refund or rebate?
President Gable, would you like to respond or designate a response?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Her, it's a very difficult calculation. There are 11,000 different calculations, very wide variance in how students select services. Those who live on campus, those who don't, different campuses have different fees. So it's difficult to do an average calculation, but I'll defer to Julie Tonninson, who can give some of the 30,000 foot ranges of where we would be likely to see individual students land.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, President Gable and Regent Her. If you think about it from the most common, in quotes, student, so the most common choice of housing, the most common choice of dining, and assuming they have the parking and all the pieces that they have paid, we are calculating in that one scenario, that fictitious scenario really, of that student would be on the Twin Cities campus about $2,364 roughly. And then it varies for the other campuses. The Rochester would be about $1,400, Crookston $1,600, Duluth $1,500, and Morris about $1,900. Those again are sort of an average, but I would refer to it more as a most common choice among each of the different fee categories. But President Gable is absolutely correct. They will all be different around those numbers.
Ms. Tomlinson, could you repeat the typical scenario for the Twin Cities campus?
Sure. Regent Powell, the calculation we came up with for the Twin Cities campus was for that most common situation, $2,364.
Okay.
Sounds very precise. It more precise than it should be, but.
Okay. Thank you. Regent Her, follow up, or does that answer your question?
That does answer some of my questions. And I do want to acknowledge President Gable and also the university leadership and staff in that looking at this issue, it's very difficult, both for the students who are, whose academics have been and financial have been impacted, and plus the university, and trying to strike a balance that would be fair to everybody. And so I'm looking at the plan and agree with Regent Beeson in that, we have to make tough decisions. And it looks like it's been thought out and balanced. So I appreciate the efforts.
All right. Thank you, Regent Her. I learned the alphabet long ago, and I seem to have forgotten some of my letters. I skipped over Regent Davenport, and D comes before H. I apologize for that and would like to call on Regent Davenport.
Not a problem, Chair Powell. Thank you. And most of my questions have been answered, and I wanted to echo Regent Beeson's input regarding the financial health of the university and why it's important to have that in situations like this. And I want to express deep, deep gratitude for our university's healthcare providers, our researchers, administration, faculty, staff, students, really stepping up and demonstrating their leadership throughout the organization. And I want to add that I respect their ability to consider and really reconsider decisions and actions based on new information and feedback, and the willingness to move quickly to change course. With the information provided, and I think the feedback that was given, I'm supporting the proposal that's been presented to us thus far. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Thank you, everybody, for being available today. I would just start out by saying that I think that in these times we have to think about who our core customer is. And our core customer is the student. And I think we should be treating them as fair as possible. And I don't think this proposal does that. In fact, I think that we should actually look at the proration date. By the way, I'm glad we're moving towards proration, but the 28th is not the right date to use in my view of this situation. I think the 16th, or if you want to think 16th for Twin Cities campus being the date that students would normally have come back from spring break, would be adequate. And that date may be different for Morris and Crookston because they had spring break, I think, a week later. So however you want to think of that. But I want to be clear that when we started this, we talked about March 11th. We told the students that they're encouraged to stay home and continue classes online. On the 16th, we said, please do not return to campus if you have a safe alternative. Let it be with friends or family. And then we go on to say that the university will ensure that we have sufficient residence hall rooms available for students who truly have no other alternatives. We cannot promise that we won't have to consolidate housing for all students in one central facility to minimize staff requirements. We also said we recognize that not all students can return home, but again, if you have alternative housing options, we strongly encourage you examine their viability for your housing needs. And we also said now we can, or none of us can predict how long the present situation may last. And if you remain on campus, you might be here for some time with very limited services. So I think the governor's date is kind of like a false date to look at, because a lot of these students would have already been at home anyway at that point. And in order to be fair to our students, we should take a look at that difference of 12 days. So I would actually, I don't know, I guess I could move an amendment now, Mr. Chair, to move the proration date from March 28th to March 16th. And I know that doesn't, I guess that would apply to all of the various parts of this proposal that use March 28th, including the student services fee. So I would like to move that as an amendment.
All right. So has everyone heard and understood Regent Hsu's amendment that we move the date of application of the rebate plan to March 16th? That's the motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair, point of information.
Yes, Regent Rocha.
Thank you. I guess I'm a little bit confused by the motion. Is it March 16th across all campuses? Because I know some campuses had different return dates from spring break, so they would have been affected differently.
I defer to Regent Shu on the dates.
Yeah, I think it might be better to amend the day after spring break as the effective date
For all campuses.
Well, yeah, for whatever campus the student happens to be on. I think Morris and Crookston had different spring break dates than Twin Cities, Rochester, and Duluth.
Okay, so then as the amended, the modification to the motion will be that we change the date of application of the refund plan to the day immediately after the end of the spring break. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's the motion. Is there a second?
I have a point of clarification. Oh, go ahead, Regent Rosha.
Please.
So my question is, with that modified motion, then Regent Shu was talking about March 16th for the Twin City campus, but in fact, the spring break was extended to March 18th. So Regent Shu, in light of your new motion or amended motion, are you talking about March 18 then as the date for the Twin Cities campus?
Regent Shu.
Well, whatever it takes to get your vote. But March 16th, I think, is the fairest date, but I would accept March 18th if somebody wanted to make a friendly amendment to that.
So you're accepting March 18th as a friendly?
Well, I mean, I haven't gotten a second yet, but I mean, if people are okay with March 18th, I think that's adequate. That would be within 2 days.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Regent Kenyatta, please.
Just again, not March 18th, but the date at which spring break, the modified spring break ended at each respective campus, right? Because they're different again.
Yeah. So President Gable, thank you, Regent Kenyatta. President Gable, I don't know if perhaps you or a member of the team can actually, for each campus, tell us what the, under Regent Shu's proposal, tell us what that date would be so that we have it accurately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Duluth and Twin Cities spring break was extended to March 18th, meaning online classes began on March 18th. Our other campuses, and I believe Rochester as well, in Morris and Crookston, students went on spring break the Monday of March 16th. That week was their spring break, and so their online classes commenced when they returned from their spring break the following Monday, which would be the 23rd.
So that's Morris and Crookston. Okay, 23rd. Okay, so then let me just sort of repeat what I just heard for everybody. The specific dates that would align with Regent Shu's proposal would be March 18th for University of Minnesota Duluth, University of Minnesota Twin Cities and Rochester, and March 23rd for Morris and for Crookston. Any questions on that, or do we agree with that those are the right dates? And if so, Regent Shu, are those the dates that you would offer as part of your motion?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think everyone's tracking the motion now. If you're not, let me know. Otherwise, I'll ask for a second.
Mr. Chair, I second the motion.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Steves, I suggest that we entertain any questions and then take a roll call vote on that motion.
Mr. Chair, correct. If you may want to call on members of the board if they have any additional comments or discussion about that motion.
Yes, are there, and thank you. So the floor is open to comments, questions on Regent Shu's motion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Regent Rosha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before making any comment, I appreciate President Gable making reference in her remarks to having information about other potential dates. Could I inquire of her and her team what would be the financial impact of this this change to the main motion.
President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Regent Rocha, I'm going to defer to Julie Tonneson with the details on to respond to your question.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we didn't calculate different dates by campus, but I can tell you that moving all of it to March 18th would be a $6.7 million increase impact to the university. So factoring in those slightly later dates on the other campuses, but they're smaller numbers, it'd be slightly less than $6.7 million.
Okay. So that would move thank you, Vice President Tomlinson. So that would move our total from 27.8 million to, it looks like 34.2. So a $6.7 million increase. Regent Rocha, does that help clarify?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And if I may make a comment?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So, you know, when we first were informed of what was offered to the 12 with the original tier 1, you know, which was prior to the governor's order, or at least that's articulated as the basis for this reconsideration. We were talking about the date coming back from spring breaks, and I think that was right. I think it was right at that point. In fact, you know, when you actually look at the function of when we ask people to vacate, the 16th is probably the better date. But as my colleague, the maker of the motion, is accepting of this, this would be within the range of acceptable. Although I would prefer the 16th because that would have been the day that people were affected this way. But yeah, it's really I look at it kind of in three ways. You know, equity is the big part. You know, our students come from a range of circumstances, from those who have family support, all the way to those that face food insecurity. And we know that for a lot of students, when the don't come back order came in, they not only were looking for places to stay now, but you know, they knew the dorms would be closing. They'd have to have summer lodging and so on, assuming that the dorms open up again in fall. And so I think it's been a substantial effort and hardship for students. And this is the population in the university community, I think, that's least suited for bearing this kind of cost. We know our graduates are going to face a very difficult employment market immediately, and we know that students who will be returning are going to have a very difficult time finding employment with the number of unemployeds that are continuing to mount. But I think as much as anything, we have a reputational risk for the university, especially as this constituency is the least capable of absorbing these costs. And when you consider the fact that the feedback we've gotten from legislative leaders, from members of the community, I don't know if you've received correspondence from parents of students and so on. This is not a place where I think the university wants to make its mark of seeking to cobble together small amounts of money at the expense of our students in this very difficult time. I think we see most institutions across the country being as broadly supportive as they possibly can. And I think this amendment puts us in a better class of company for making sure that we reflect the fact that we support this. Lastly, I'll just mention that, we're only talking about costs here. I personally think that the 6 million, whatever, the difference between the main motion and the amended motion, I think the benefit to the university and goodwill and relationship with the legislature and relationship with students and their families and with the community at large, I think that's a very wise investment on our part at this point to support our students. But finally, we do have the ability to mitigate some of these costs. And in fact, I think we'll perhaps in April 7th, we'll hear more about this, but this will move us into some pretty serious conversations about how to reform the way the university operates to try to understand the financial implications of this and how we're going to operate going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your indulgence.
Okay, thank you, Regent Rocha. Other questions or comments with regard to the SHU amendment? I believe Regent Davenport would like to comment.
Question was answered. It was about cost or if there's any other administrative feedback on that cost difference.
And Regent Davenport, you feel that's been answered, or would you like additional clarification on the question, or?
Thank you, Chair Powell. The question has been answered, and just interested if there's any other comment.
Senior Vice President Tomlinson, any additional information, or President Gable? Okay, it looks like nothing. All right. Okay.
Mr. Chair, Regent Simonson's trying to get your attention there.
Yes. So I think I've got a number of folks lined up now. I'm going to call on Regent Mayron first, and then we'll go to Regent Simonson.
Thank you. I have a general comment and then a question for President Gable for the administration. So my general comment is, in an ideal world, we would be taking up this question in the context of what the overall impact of COVID-19 is going to be on the university. And in an ideal world, we would be, because we know that there is not going to be, or it's not likely, that there will be adequate dollars to address all of the issues that are going to be created for the university and for the students and faculty in our community by this pandemic. So, as I said, in an ideal world, we'd have all of the stressors in front of us and be able to look at the issue as a whole and be able to prioritize how we use our limited dollars. But of course, this isn't an ideal world. I understand that, and we have to make a decision now with respect to the students. And I support making a decision now as opposed to holding off until we know what this is going to look like overall on the university, which we may not know for many, many months. So that's my overall comment. My question really goes to President Gable or the administration, which is, you came to us with a proposal using the shelter at home order, March 28th, as the date by which your recommendation is founded. As you can see from the amendment is now talking about dating it back to the date that individuals would have come back from spring break. And just to make it easier, I'll use the Twin City campus of March 18th. And that would have been an option as well for you to think about. And I'm sure you probably did as you were trying to look at the various dates for your recommendation and what would be most appropriate for the university. So I would like your input on this as to why, what you think about the amendment, why you selected March 28th versus the date by which students would have come back from spring break. I think your input and reaction to this is as important as our own.
Thank you, Regent Mayron, and President Gable, if you would like to respond to Regent Mayron's question on how you considered the various dates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Mayron. So in our communications with students, some students followed our suggestions, some didn't. Their students all came back at different times. Some haven't come back at all. Some are still there. Some have their possessions in the dorms. No one, this administration wakes up every morning and goes to bed every night thinking about what's best for students in every way, what's fair to them, how we instruct them well, how we set up a research environment that serves them well, how then we as an institution serve the community. But given that in the period between the end of spring break and the governor's order, people followed our recommendation to different degrees. Every student would have a different date that they would normally say dropped off their keys, sort of as the vocabulary for when they left. Some never came back at all. The governor's order is when we felt a very bright line in the sand, so to speak, between the first phase of the chaos of the pandemic on how it was affecting what we were doing and a very clear next phase. It changed how we did everything that we do in a synced, bright moment, whereas in that period in between, there was a lot of variation. And when it changed to a distant delivery of everything that we did. So that was the thinking and rationale, was that this is the fair way to do it. But obviously, we defer to the collective wisdom of the board and their guidance on how we will do the calculation exactly as is determined by this group.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, President Gable. Regent Simonson.
Chair Powell, thank you, President. I'm President Gable. I'm in favor of this amendment, but I do have a question. I was in a conference call, a financial conference call with my advisor on Wednesday, and her son goes to the university. We just briefly brought up this topic because he was aware of it, and he left right after spring break. And her issue is that she doesn't need the money back. So my question is, and maybe it's my business side that goes to cash flow, that can, maybe it'd be an administrative nightmare, but rather than send a check, can we carry it forward? I think we're doing that at Rochester anyway. So it's just a comment about, and goes to cash flow.
Thank you, Regent Simonson. President Gable, I think the question is about, use of, refunds as credits and that sort of thing. Would you respond, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Regent Simonson. It appears from the outside that calculating these sort of things is simple, but actually it's very complicated because the money that students pay for tuition, fees, housing, dining comes from multiple sources. Some of it is their own resources for parents, probably like the colleague that you were speaking with. Some is federal support, some is loans, some of it's work study. It is widely varying for each student in how they pay, and of course also in what they select for their housing, dining, and what activities they participate in, if they have a car on campus. I mean, I could go on and on. We have a couple of constraints. We actually talked exactly about what you're talking about, either that it carry forward as a credit, or in some cases, because we've received lots of feedback from families that have said, look, this was a sunk cost. Maybe I can put this into a pool that could be redistributed to the ones who are the most in crisis, which we have set up the emergency fund for. But students that pay fees and tuition towards what is the federal definition of cost of attendance, you hear us use that phrase, we are prohibited from holding. So if a student runs a surplus, has a credit balance, we are required to first apply it against any outstanding bill for anything, and then we have to distribute it back. That's a legal mandate. It could be with all the things that are changing that at some point down the road, that mandate's waived. It hasn't been yet. And so we couldn't find a way under the way the rules work today to do what you're describing, but we did consider it and tried to find a way.
Thank you. Thank you, President Gable. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, thank you everyone for your comments. I guess I'm trying to balance considering the fact, really kind of speaking to Regent Miron's comments, that this isn't the last of it, right? And for anyone who had the chance to read the email from the student reps this morning and the other things that they're requesting and the other things that we'll have to discuss down the line, this isn't the last of it. And I'm trying to figure out how to balance trying to do right by the students, but at the same time, not depleting, I guess, our reserves that we'll have to use down the line to help students. And I guess my question would be to the administration, do we know how many students came back after spring break? And I understand, I don't know if it might be impossible to do a student by student analysis because people moved on different dates, but essentially, is there a way to capture the fact that there actually are a lot of students that returned after the modified spring break versus those who didn't, and that the number is actually somewhere in the middle between, for those days, it's not quite 6 million, it might be 5, it might be 4, I'm not sure.
So thank you, Regent Kenyana. I think President Gable, the question goes to you, and and perhaps to the finance team. And it really is about, do we have some sense for what sort of on average, when students were starting to depart? So President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Kenyanya, a lot of students didn't come back at all and left their belongings behind. The ones who didn't come back at all for a stretch of time, their things were still in their room. We started doing a census, if you will. I know we've just done our national census, so I don't want to confuse the two. As the governor's order came online and announced to students at that time that we would be going in and throwing away anything perishable and securing their materials. And so from the governor's order forward, we have a pretty good census count of where we are with students on campus. In between, it's really difficult to calculate with any accuracy. And so I would suggest, if we're thinking in terms of fairness, which of course, I mean, there's no one here who wants to be unfair. Everyone wants to be fair to everyone, students as the cornerstone, and then the institution itself and all of the individual people who comprise the institution. We either try to get an answer about when they came back, if they've come back at all. We could prorate based on whether their belongings are still there or not, and we're supervising there. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that we could do this calculation. And I know we're considering one motion on the table, but there could be dozens of ways that we could do this on a per student basis. I will tell you that from the decisions we were making writ large across the system, the most primary, really fundamental across the board change was as we aligned with the governor's order. Before that, huge variation.
Okay. Thank you, President Gable. Any other questions regarding the SHU amendment from anyone on the board? Okay, seeing none, I think we should.
Ken, I would like to.
Yes, Regent Anderson.
Okay, so I will preface this by saying that I'm a mortuary science major and not a math major. But while we've been talking today, I've pulled out my calendar. I looked at the calendar of the university. Spring semester was January 21 to go to May 13th. If you take Regent SHU's date, that's a total of 17 weeks. Regent SHU's date would say the students lived in the dormitories for 9 weeks, 9 of the 17 or 52%. The administration, going to March 28th, has said we would be there 10 weeks of the 17th, or 58%. So on those two percentages, you would say that they either have a 42% refund coming back or a 48% refund. It's in there. I look at the money and I'm just using Twin Cities because that's where I think I'm right. The refund back for Tier 1 and Tier 2, which is dormitories and food, is about $17 million. And Ms. Tonneson can probably tell me if I'm close on this. I think our total revenue for dormitories and food on Twin Cities is about $38 million. So if you take giving about $17 million back out of $38 million, it's at 45%. It's right in between the 42 that the original motion talks about and the 48% that Regent SHU's talk about. And to further conclude, I will just tell you that when we look at it just the weeks, it does not cover all the expenses, because when students pay their dormitory bill, some of that money goes to, prior to them coming, a thorough cleaning of the dormitories and the buildings and things like that. And when they all leave, there's another thorough cleaning of the dormitories and everything else. So, and there's probably a lot of expenses I'm not even think about that we prepare for the students and then we prepare after they leave. But I think the original recommendation cuts the 9 or 10 weeks exactly in half on the total amount that is given back. And I realize that some are going to be single rooms, some are going to be double rooms, some are going to be triple rooms. They have different meal plans, so they would all get differing amounts. But the amount we're paying back is 45% of the And I'm basing this on a roughly $38 million deal, which I recollect is correct. I might be wrong. But I think we're right in the middle. So I will speak against the amendment and for the original motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
This is Brian Steves. We have a technical issue with Chair Powell has dropped off the call momentarily. We're trying to reconnect him. If everybody could just stand by.
Hello? Hello?
Chair Powell, we hear you just fine.
Okay, very sorry. Don't know what happened. I dropped out when Regent Anderson was asking or making his comment on the math. I apologize. Here I am. Maybe Regent Anderson can quickly summarize that, and then we'll see if there are any other comments.
I will just say that my simple math, if my assumptions are correct, say that the original amendment, or the original bill, if you want to call it, the original resolution from administration pays back about 45% in tier 1 and tier 2 expenses to students. And the difference between the SHU amendment and the original, it pays back 42, and the Regent SHU amendment would pay back 48. And I think that it pays back 45. And actually 45% is what we're paying back, and that's, in my opinion, about the approximate amount we should. That summarizes it.
All right, thank you, Regent Anderson.
I have a question, if I could.
Regent Mayron, could you hold for a second? I'm going to go to Regent Swigum, please, and then we'll go to you.
He's still muted.
Regent Swigum, just hold for a second. It appears you're still muted.
Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay. And you missed my first 10 seconds. It was wonderful. Mr. Chairman and members, I would like to respectfully speak against Regent Stu's amendment and in favor of the recommendation from President Gable. And let me just mention a couple of things, maybe even enhancing upon what Regent Anderson said. But certainly this discussion has taken place with the administration and with President Gable and her staff. What day to choose? We're looking at 100% proration, which I think is the right thing to do. We have moved to that from the original recommendation. We've moved to the 100% proration. Arbitrarily, you could pick any date you want. You could pick today, where we're going to take an action as a board. You could pick the governor's order. You could pick March 23rd. You could pick March 18th when the students came back from the spring break. In fact, you could pick the day of spring break starting because many of them were no longer in the rooms. It's an arbitrary choice. But I think when you look at the balance being the support of the students, the support of the university, the fixed costs. Regent Anderson talked about fixed costs. Not only, Tom, is it the labor that is involved before and after move-in, but it's insurance, it's utilities, it's other fixed costs as well that need to be met by the university. You balance it all together, I think we are all supporting the students. I don't think there's a question that one supports the students more than the other, or that we're not there to support the students. You can arbitrarily, thoughtfully, argue almost any date you want to choose. But the March 28th date is the day things changed in Minnesota and changed in the university. It changed by a governor's order. Life changed for all of us by that governing decree. And that seems to be a very reasonable, a very sound, a very thoughtful date to come forward with the proration of fees, of dining, of housing. And let me just close by saying, Regent Sue, I think you make a thoughtful amendment. I just rather side on the side of, in this case, the president, who has considered all the options, all the balance, all the considerations, and so I speak against the Sue amendment.
All right, thank you. One last comment, and that will be from Regent Mayron, and then we'll move on to the vote.
Mr. Chair, I would like to comment as well.
All right.
It's really a question for perhaps Julie Tomlinson, and perhaps looping back to Regent Anderson. I'm not sure, Regent Anderson, I understood your calculations and how you got to the 45%, because it seemed to be picking up tier 1 and tier 2. And I believe that the proposal by the administration is really talking about setting aside tier 1 and talking about the cost of tier 2 through tier 6. But that said, I would like to hear from the administration on, is this 45% figure that Regent Anderson has calculated, is that an appropriate calculation just in terms of numbers?
Thank you, Regent Mayron. President Gable or a designated hitter, is there some validation of the numbers that Regent Anderson noted?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Regent Mayron, I'm sending in the designated hitter on this one. I'll kick it to Julie.
Mr. Chair, Regents, I'm not sure I followed the math either. I have to admit that. The total, I do want to clarify one thing before I move on, and that is, Regent Mayron, the recommendation, the way that the table and the chart that was presented was built, is we showed tier 1 because that was the original recommendation. Tier 2 is a cost over and above tier 1. So tier 1 is added into the total. So as you move across the page, across the tiers or up the tiers, however you want to think about it, each one is an incremental increase that you add on to the previous. So we had the cost for 1, tier 2 is an additional cost over tier 1, and so forth, to get to the total. So I just wanted to clarify that. The total amount of revenue that would be lost, that we're estimating as a percent of the unit's budget, if that is what you were trying to get at, Regent Anderson, does vary by campus in terms of what they expected to spend, and it varies based partly on what a lot of those fixed costs were that you were talking about, how much debt services involved, insurance, payroll, all of those pieces are different by campus. So there isn't the 45%, the total revenue loss to the Twin Cities campus, we're estimating at just over 21 million, is less than 45%, I believe, of what their budgeted expenditures are for this year for housing and residential life and for the fees. So I'm not sure that's what you were getting at, but I'm sorry, I couldn't exactly follow your math either.
All right. Regent Mayron, follow up or further clarification or?
No, I appreciate the clarification on how to read the chart, so I stand corrected on that. I will say, because people have weighed in, I am going to support the amendment. I think that dating it back to the dates that the students were were advised not to return to campus once spring break was over, is the date that we should be using. I think that is the most fair result to the students, for those who took, I think, what was excellent advice from the administration at the time based on all the information that we knew, and the incremental increase in cost to the university, whether it's 6,700,000 or something less, I think is a money that would be well spent on trying to bring the students as whole as we possibly can. So I am going to support the amendment.
All right. Thank you, Regent Mayeron. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. It seems to me that I have a bit of a different definition of what arbitrary means. Associating with Regent Mayeron's remarks, the date that's in the amendment is not arbitrary. It's actually based on what was happening and what impacted students' behavior, and therefore it would not be arbitrary. I think the governor's order is in the category of arbitrary, at least more arbitrary, to the extent that I don't think that had the impact on student decision making as much as the 16 or 18th dates would implicate. And on the point of making students whole, I fully agree. We have inefficiencies here, we understand that, but I think it's a mistake. I think it would be an error for us to use the inefficiencies to harm students that did in fact follow the advice. And if there's an inefficiency with a few students that have some sort of a windfall because we aren't truly able to capture that they left earlier than, or that they didn't leave as early as directed, but would be making requests for the refund, I'm willing to accept that inefficiency much more so than penalizing students who did follow the order or the directive of the administration. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important. I also point out that this amendment, it brings us quite a ways toward addressing the concerns that were raised by Mr. Kraft and Mr. King and the student representatives in their letter to us today. I have great respect for the effort they put in with fairly short notice, and thank them for that. And then finally, I think that failure to do this in this way, particularly with such a, when we're talking about this particular amount in relation to the question at hand, when you have schools like Nebraska and Penn State reportedly providing refunds of 60 and 50%, I think it's an unforced error for us on a reputational basis to not make our students as whole as possible in this very difficult time. And I think it would be well advised for the board to take President Gabel's signal that she's willing to do what the board is inclined to do on this matter, and make sure that the public sees us as being as supportive as I think we're supposed to be to our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Mr. Steves, I want to make sure that, are there others in the queue who would like to comment, or have we sort of completed this process?
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu would like to speak, and not Regent, and Ms. Tonneson wants to make a clarification.
Okay. If we can hear first from Ms. Tonneson, and then we'll go to Regent Hsu.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just had a light bulb moment. I think, follow Regent Anderson's math, and I just wanted to let him know that I did the quick calculation and I came up with about 43%. So he was correct. The Twin Cities, just the housing and residential life portion, is about 43% of the semester budget for those units. So he was very close, and I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, thank you. All right, Regent.
Sorry, did you call on me?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
Mr. Chair?
please. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I would just like to say that this is not about math. This is about what's fair. And the people who are virtually behind me, this is the freshman class this year that represent 93%, or 93% of them are living in our dormitories right now, or were in the fall. We need to do the best we can for our students, whether it's a few $100s, few $1 million, or whatever. It doesn't really matter right now. The reputational risk that we have, the threat of lawsuits, all of these things are going to play out over time, and we should be doing our best not only to avoid those, But if we do the best we can for our students today, and we should be, even in the world of social distancing, we should be wrapping our arms around them and helping them figure out what they're going to do. We hope that they come back to school next year. We hope that we admit a class that is going to want to live in our dormitories this next year. And I think the actions that that we take today are going to be good for the university if we are fair to the students. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you support the amendment.
Thank you, Regent Shu. Anyone else? Mr. Steves in the queue.
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I'll just comment briefly then before we go to a vote. First of all, I appreciate the discussion very much, which I think has been thoughtful and really covered the issue pretty carefully. I think it's not an easy one. I'm going to support the president's recommendation. I think that there are numerous places that we could land. However, for me, the stay-at-home order was a bright line, which caused us to move significantly. And I think the fact that she has recommended that we extend the rebates and the refunds across all of the additional services brings the numbers up quite significantly. So the impact of the proposal is to double from where we started from $1,200 to nearly $2,400 per student on the Twin Cities campus. I don't think this is an easy one. There's a lot of judgment here, but I think we've landed in about the right place. So I'll be supporting it. And with that, Mr. Steves, if you would call the roll.
Mr. Chair, this is on the Shu amendment. Regent Anderson. Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
No.
Regent Beeson votes no. Regent Davenport.
No.
Regent Davenport votes no. Regent Herr.
No.
Regent Herr votes no. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
No.
Regent McMillan votes no. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
No.
Regent Swigum votes no. Chair Powell.
No.
Chair Powell votes no. Mr. Chair, the votes in favor are 6. The votes against are 6, which means that the motion fails.
All right. So we'll revert now to the president's motion, and given that we're divided at 6 and 6, I think we were going to want to have a discussion of that situation, but I'll take any I'll take any thoughts or commentary on moving forward in a 6-6 situation.
Alphabetical order? The original speaking order?
I think so, yes, for sure.
Okay, so
All
then
right.
you're after, who comes after Sue?
So let's move then to the president's recommended refund plan that you've all seen and that we've reviewed now carefully, and we'll go through the order again and with any questions, clarifications, or comments, and we'll start with Regent Anderson.
Is Regent, are we speaking or are we voting?
Well, no, I'm offering an opportunity for additional questions, clarifications, or comments. If you don't have any, then we can move on.
Mr. Chair, we had partially worked through the speaking order, and I was wondering if you may want to pick it up at Regent Kenyanya, because we have a number of regents who haven't had a chance to speak to the original motion.
All right, that I'll take that. That sounds fine. So give me since we're sort of struggling back and forth with, do you have a list, Mr. Steves, of those who would desire to speak? Or should we just pick it up from Regent Mayron?
I believe Regent Kenyanya was next in the alphabetical order.
All right. Regent Kenyanya, it's over to you for questions or commentary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we're back on the original resolution. I won't reiterate a lot of comments and a lot of the discussion that we've already had in the context of the motion. But I will point out one thing that has framed a lot of my thinking on this, and part of the reason I was happy to see the increase from the original Tier 1 proposal to the Tier B one, and part of the reason I supported the amendment. We made a commitment to our staff and faculty, including student staff, and recognizing that in the context of a global pandemic and what that means for families and for students right now. And this, something that I noticed, the federal bill, the federal bailout, which was not our doing, but is relevant, left out just that demographic, college students, in terms of if you're over 18, claimed as a dependent, there is no refund for that. And I think that fits in a lot with our demographic. And I think we have a lot of hard decisions to make going forward. This won't be the last of them. And every dollar we use now does give us less to use going forward. And that's just a fact. But I think what's important right now is just maximizing folks' cash flow. For folks who've lost their jobs, that were off campus and whatnot, any extra dollar is going to be huge. And if our students become insolvent, they're not enrolling in the fall. And I think it's just important to think of it in that context. So I'm still supportive of giving back as much as possible. It's not perfect, because in that scenario, depending on when people move, you actually do have folks getting more than the date, and we understand there's fixed costs. It's not a strictly rental. It's not a hotel room per the night. So the math isn't perfect anywhere. But those are just some of the thoughts framing my decision making. But I'd be interested to hear other comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Regent Mayron.
Thank you. My question really I have a question, and it has to do with the letter that we received right before this meeting from the student representatives. They commented on a variety of different topics that we're discussing, one of them having to do with the fees, student fees, that under the administration's proposal contemplates 50% credit from March 28th to the end of the semester. I'm wondering, President Gable, any thoughts or response to the students with respect to their comments on the fees?
Thank you, Regent Mayron. President Gable.
Mr. Chair, Regent Mayron, I'll answer broadly, and then I'll turn it over to Senior Vice President Burnett for some of the explanation of the analysis. The umbrella answer is that there are a lot of our student services that we're still running. We're running remotely, but are still up and running, fully accessible to the students from a distance. And so this was a calculation that captures that reality and commitment. But into the more nuanced details on that, I'll defer to SVP Burnett.
Senior Vice President Burnett, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Regent Mayron. Yeah, we did receive this about the same time you did. I think the point that President Gable pointed out is just dead on. many of the services are still operating at 100%, including mental health services, with the exception of some areas that you just can't do remotely. But they're trying to provide full service with the exception of the rec centers and student unions. Although the student unions are open because many of our students don't have a home computer or Wi-Fi, so they're accessing computer labs still in the student unions. They're also running student government elections and doing a bunch of things. So they're doing their very best. And we felt like this 50% fee from the common date forward in the president's proposal was the best fairness we could do, with the respect that they're trying to continue to provide as many of the services that those fees support across the 5 campuses. And they do have fixed costs as well, which we'll have to work through after we get through with all of this. But that's the best answer I can give you, is that it was not an easy decision, but I know that our student affairs professionals are trying to continue as many of the services as possible and continue to pay all the student workers in the rec centers and across our system is our commitment made. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senior Vice President Burnett. Regent Mayron, does that clarify?
Yes, it does. And I just want to state that I will be supporting the motion that is on the table. Obviously, the motion to amend did not pass. Both motions are what I call within the realm of reason, where reasonable people can differ. And this motion is clearly within the realm of reason for all the reasons that not only the administration has stated, but others as well who supported the main motion. So I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Powell, and appreciate the dialogue this morning. I want to pick up where a couple of regents have gone with regard to just recognizing and applauding what our leadership team has done at this university, and both making decisions, and Regent Powell, you started here, but making decisions in times of unprecedented duress and challenge. They've made sound, good, and consistent decisions. And I think in that scope, one of the things I look for in quality leadership is leaders who are able to take a decision, and as additional input comes in, recognize that that decision could be made better. And I think that's what our leadership team has done here. The Gable administration has brought forth a very reasonable and thoughtful proposal. So that, and then communication. I think we are one of the leaders in this country in terms of quality and quantity of communication that's going out, and have heard that from leadership at other universities in Minnesota, that they look to this institution, and the communication has been superb. And I believe the students recognize that too. So just two things that I don't know how we have this conversation without first recognizing what kind of conditions this team is operating under. So before and now moving on to the substance of the proposal, I think it's pretty easy to try and fine tune this, and very thoughtful dialogue around a 12-day difference in the start date of this thing. But I think we've really got to be big picture as we get into this, and not get too hung up on 12 days or 2 weeks, because the students who live on campus are a very, very important stakeholder of this institution, but they're not our only stakeholder. And I know this affects with the fees more than students who live on campus, but we've got staff, we've got faculty, we've got students living off campus, we've got the state of Minnesota, we got our research, outreach, the education mission gets talked about a bit here. And I think as regents, we have to be thinking long-term about fiscal prudency as well. And we owe that to the students of the future, that we make decisions that really take into account our long-term fixed costs, our short-term fixed costs, which are up because we made I think the right humanitarian and macroeconomic decision to including students, who have nothing to do right now. Not everybody, a lot of them have plenty to do, but some have nothing to do, and we're paying everybody irregardless. So fiscal prudency and long-term thinking matter, and I think there's a balancing act that's underway here. I think that the Regent Rocha said the equities matter. They do. I think we've got an equitable proposal. Is it perfectly fair? Perhaps not, but it's very fair, and I think it's a good one, and I will find also noted that we identified 2 universities higher fees and or with higher refunds, Nebraska and Penn State. I think we could, if we wanted to go down that path, and I'd urge us not to, we could look at Michigan and Michigan State, who both have credits, fixed credits like what we originally proposed, and Purdue, which is substantially underneath that. So I think we'll probably find ourselves in any analysis being bounded on either side by some who are perhaps more generous, some who are less. Again, I'm going to support the president's recommendation here for all those reasons.
All right. Thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the dialogue. I'm especially appreciative of the board having an opportunity to participate and act on this matter. And I also appreciate, as has already been stated, that we have revisited this as has been described, and that what is in front of us is clearly a better result, I believe, and reaches some of these equities. As a quick clarification, I think Purdue, as it was represented to us in the administrative materials, underrepresented what Purdue was doing. I think that the money that was listed in that report was only about housing, but they also have some other refunds coming related to meal plans and so on. But I don't know that that's particularly relevant right now. But in any case, and I appreciate the comments. We were as far as people that will support this. I'm not going to support it, and I'll explain why. We were moments ago, we were one vote away from, I think, the board being fully on board with the proposal. Perhaps not, but a proposal that, when it goes to the equities, is expansive in relation to the people that are least able to endure an inequity, and that's our students. And when we talk about these other costs that are associated with maintaining the dormitories and so on, I think a couple folks have spoken to that. That's the wrong side of the equation. It's about value. It's about what value the students received. That if you pay for a toothbrush and you don't get a toothbrush and you demand a refund, they don't give you 50% back, saying, well, we have all these costs making these toothbrushes. The fact is you didn't get one, so the equities would be that you're not paying for it, even though they've got costs in maintaining their factory. But it's really about what was achieved there. And so the reason that I'm going to vote against the proposal as presented is, I think that picking the date that we've selected shorts many students who followed our directive a couple of weeks earlier. I'm certainly not in a position to tell an individual student that that's not important, that that's not significant financially to them. And I want them to understand that I, for one, believe that we should be as responsive as possible. Again, I think this is an unforced error. I think that this will set us up for criticism as to why we're retaining funds that students paid for which they did not receive value. And I would prefer much that we came to a conclusion that we all could support. But that being said, I appreciate the improvement, but I think that we need to do better. And I think that we need to, at this moment, move forward in trying to address other concerns that the students have raised in their memorandum today, and other concerns that they have raised up to this point, and look forward to seeing you all on the 7th. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent Simonson.
No comment, thank you.
Say again.
No comment, thank you.
Okay, no comment. All right. Thank you, Regent Simonson.
Regent Rocha, I agree with what he just said.
All right. Thank you, Regent Simonson. Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, members, I would first like to just give a little reflection of this last 3 weeks that the university, well, all people have been through, not just the university, but specifically President Gable. It's been a series of rapid fire decisions that she's had to make, making them very, very well and with great leadership. And she's brought us today, folks, to a sweet spot. Regent Rocha, I disagree with you. I think we're at a sweet spot right now with the motion that's before us. You look at the original recommendation that Joan felt she had to make quickly, the $1,200. She's basically empowered the board, our empowerment, to make a further decision. She set out a floor. She set out a floor. Maybe it was a marker, so to speak, to set out, but that marker, we had every right, which we're empowered to do right now, to change that with new information, with new facts. And that's what the president did with the recommendation, is she found new facts, new information, whether it be from other universities, whether it be internally, whether it be petitions from students. And we've responded to that in a very, very great, I think, sweet spot. Right before us right now, Regents, my 11 fellow members, we have a choice. The choice before us right now is 100% prorating of student housing, of student dining, of the fees. That's what's before us right now. We're not voting on something else that's not before us or went before us 20 minutes ago. We're right now voting on the choice to give 100% proration from the day that certainly is that bright line. Mr. Chairman, you spoke about that bright line. We all know that our lives have changed dramatically, each and every one of us. When Governor Walz made the stay-at-home order, our lives changed completely. Our students' lives changed completely. The university changed completely. And I think that we have come to that sweet spot right now of a balance that recognizes everything involved and is the best decision for our students for today and for tomorrow. And I would encourage every one of our regents to recognize the sweet spot that we're in and to act positively in the choice that is before us right now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Swigum. So what I'd like to do now is, we said we'd get everybody, a couple of opportunities to speak. So I'm going to just go down the list one more time in alphabetical order. And we've heard a number of people speak recommendation, and I'm going to give others an opportunity if they would so like to ask additional questions or offer additional commentary. And starting with Regent Anderson.
I'll pass.
Regent Anderson passes.
I'll pass.
Yeah, he passes. Okay, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, this has been a good discussion. It's not popular or populist to vote against giving more money back to the students. And let me remind everybody what we're not passing along to students in terms of additional costs. We're not passing along the fixed costs that we have associated with these properties, the debt service, the utilities, the staffing largely. We're not passing along the extra cost to go online with our instruction. We're not passing along what could be a $50 million broken budget by the end of this fiscal year. We're not going to be able to pass that along. We're not talking about decreasing merit or need-based aid. In fact, we may have to increase that for reasons that we've talked about. We haven't passed along to students work that they didn't perform on campus. So all the work study people got paid. Everybody got paid. Everybody's still in the boat. And we're paying for that and we're absorbing that. So I just want to make sure to counter partly what Regent Kenyanya said. There's some things that there's a lot that we're absorbing that we're not passing along. We're not passing a lot along by choice and because it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Regent Davenport.
Thank you for the conversation. I pass.
All right. Regent Herr.
I just agree, Mr. Chair. I agree with Regent Beeson's statements and comments. And I do want to reiterate that my concern really is about the students, but also the university, and trying to balance everything out. And these are very hard choices, as per our conversation about Regent Shu's amendment. And so I know we're trying our best, and we're trying to be mission-minded and looking at the needs of the university. So these are really tough decisions, and I appreciate everyone's comments.
All right, thank you, Regent Her. I think, Mr. Steves, what I'd like to do at this point is just see if you've got on your list anyone else as we go to Regent Shu, Kenyana, Mayron, McMillan, Rosha. I think everyone's had a chance to talk. Do we have anyone else who would like to offer additional comments before we move to a vote on the president's recommendation?
Thought we were on a second round.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. If you, Regent Shu, if you'd like to speak, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say that our lives really changed a lot sooner than the governor's order. I think still that's a mistaken bright line. The bars and restaurants were closed before St. Patrick's Day, which was, I think, the closing was announced on 3/16, which is actually about the date that we were talking about in my previous amendment. The rec centers were closed on the 17th. So why is the 28th important when we announced the closing of the rec centers on the 17th? There's just no rational argument on the 28th. And I like to say, we haven't talked one bit about reducing other costs or reducing costs around the operations of the university. Iowa State University just announced a couple days ago that they're cutting their salaries in their athletic department. We haven't had one, and that's voluntary. I think it started as a voluntary thing. I haven't heard one thing about how we're going to try and stem the costs of the university. All I'm hearing about is making the students pay for the costs. And I think it's just a sad day for this board. It's a sad day for this university. And I'll just leave it there. I won't be supporting this.
All right. Thank you, Regent Shu. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Regents, and the university community. I actually want to agree with a lot of what Regent Beeson said, and just kind of highlight all the good that has been done. I think, when we're discussing an issue, very specific one like today, it's very easy to, that's all we're going to talk about, but there is a lot good that has been done. There's a lot great leadership that's been shown from the administration. There's a lot of the commitment we made to our faculty and staff. So Regent Beeson, you make excellent points on those. I guess I was just analyzing it as, housing's an auxiliary. And that's how we've always looked at it. With the other operations elsewhere in the university not necessarily being factored into that. But I won't reiterate other comments. I will say that I completely understand the resolution and where it comes from. But I guess based on today's conversation, further contemplation, and the letter that we received from the student representatives, there's still a lot of unanswered questions on this and things that'll have to be discussed going forward. But I guess I'll be inclined to not support the resolution. Thank you.
All right. Regent Mayron.
I'll just make the additional comment that I disagree with Regent Shu when he says there is no rational argument for the 28th. I think their administration has given us a very rational argument for why that date was picked. I think there was a rational argument for an earlier date, which we considered and was not voted up. I think there are rational arguments for both dates. but the earlier date did not reach consensus, and for all of the reasons that we've already talked about, I will support the administration's proposal as currently worded.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Regent McMillan?
With Regent Mayron's analysis there are very good reasons in a system of 69,000 students, 5 campuses, and dozens and dozens of different plans to land on a date where the governor shut everything down. And I think it's a very rational date. So that's all I have to add. Thank you. I will support the proposal.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Rocha, anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, I've already spoken about the equitable issue. I've spoken about the reputational risk. I want to speak to the sweet spot analogy. If I owe somebody $100 and I say I'm going to give you $80, that's a sweet spot to me, but it's unlikely I'm going to see it as a sweet spot. The fact is, there's an understanding that the value that we were providing to those that abided by the initial directive, it's a broader number than what we're providing here. And for that reason, as I stated earlier, I will not be supporting it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Regent Simonson?
Just a brief comment. I'm for 100% prorated too, but prorated from the return of spring break. And the difference, I've already pointed out, the difference in dollars isn't that much as a percent or total dollars. And we certainly could find other ways to make up that, whatever, $7 or $8 million. So I'm against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Simonson. Regent Swigum?
Mr. Chairman, just a thank you to you for empowering the board to make this important decision. And to my fellow friend, close ally, Regent Rocha, someday too, we shall agree.
All right. Thank you, Regent Swigum. And I will just reiterate my comments earlier, which is that I think this is a difficult problem to solve. And there are a number of factors that we're trying to balance here. I think, again, that the president, in picking a very bright line date where really everything shut down after that date, and then extending the rebates to really every category of student service, the result being, as an example, moving the rebate from $1,200 on the Twin Cities campus to $2,400 is a very, very, very significant movement. I think it gets us, as Regent Mayron said, to a good place. Reasonable people could disagree, but I think it's a very good place. And so with that, I'll ask for the roll call vote. And Mr. Steves, if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Chair, this is on the president's recommendation. Regent Anderson.
I vote yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
No.
Regent Hsu votes no. Regent Kenyanya.
No.
Regent Kenyanya votes no. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
Yes.
Regent McMillan votes yes. Regent Rocha.
No.
Regent Rocha votes no. Regent Simonson.
No.
Regent Simonson votes no. Regent Swigum. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair Powell.
Yes.
Chair Powell votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 8 in favor and 4 against the motion.
All right. So then by a vote of 8-4, the motion passes. Look, I want to thank everybody for a very good discussion this morning and the manner in which it was conducted. I really appreciate it. I want to thank again the president for moving to address and, bring this issue forward again. I think we've brought ourselves to a much better place. I also want to thank everybody's flexibility, in use of this format, which we're all learning some new skills. So just to remind you, we will convene again on Tuesday at 10 a.m. And at that time, we will discuss the actions taken by the university to date in response to the pandemic. We'll also receive some scoping and really preliminary discussion of the financial and operating impacts. And I want to sort of clarify that, this meeting we're not ready to have, the president and her team are not ready to have a detailed budget discussion on Tuesday morning because we just don't have the information and the numbers yet, but we are going to scope and give you preliminary assessments so that the board can start to see the various categories of challenge and risk that we face as we enter into budgeting for next year. And we will also discuss the declared university emergency on that at that meeting. So we look forward to seeing all of you then. And I'll just conclude by saying that this special meeting was, I think, very constructive. I think it's clear that we will probably need more of these as the pandemic situation continues to unfold. And we won't hesitate to call them as needed and just, watch for communication from us on additional special meetings. Finally, there being no additional business before the board at this special meeting, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Favor, aye. Any opposed? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.